Sarah Martinez crouched behind the concrete barrier, her rifle scope trained on the enemy compound 300 meters away. The desert sun beat down mercilessly on her position, but she remained perfectly still. Years of military training had taught her patience was everything in her line of work. Her radio crackled to life. "Eagle Eye, this is Command. What's your status?" "In position, Command. Target building in sight. Counting 12 hostiles on the perimeter," Sarah whispered into her headset, adjusting her scope slightly. She had been part of Delta Team for 3 years now, one of only a handful of female snipers in the Special Operations Unit. Her teammates respected her skills, even if some still questioned whether a woman belonged in combat. Sarah had proven herself time and again, but today felt different somehow. "Copy that, Eagle Eye. Hold your position. Strike team is moving in from the east," came the reply from Captain Rogers, their team leader. Sarah watched through her scope as her 5 teammates approached the compound. Martinez, Wilson, Davies, and Captain Rogers himself. They had trained together, bled together, and saved each other's lives countless times. She considered them family. The mission was supposed to be simple. Intelligence had located a high-value target in the compound, a terrorist leader who had been planning attacks on American soil. Sarah's job was to provide overwatch and eliminate any threats to her team as they moved in for the capture. Everything went wrong at once. Explosions erupted from multiple directions as hidden enemies emerged from concealed positions. Sarah's teammates found themselves surrounded, and, through her scope, she watched in horror as enemy fighters poured out of buildings they hadn't known were occupied. "Command, this is Eagle Eye. The intel was wrong. It's a trap. My team is surrounded." Sarah shouted into her radio, already picking off enemy fighters one by one. "Eagle Eye, maintain your position," came the cold reply. "What? No, my team needs immediate backup." Sarah continued firing, watching her teammates take cover behind vehicles and debris. Captain Rogers' voice came through the radio, strained and desperate. "Eagle Eye, we need immediate extraction. We're taking heavy fire." Sarah was about to respond when a new voice came through her earpiece, one she recognized as Colonel Hayes, their commanding officer back at base. "All units, this is Command. Mission parameters have changed. The target is more valuable than anticipated. Strike team is to hold position at all costs." Sarah's blood ran cold. "Command, my team can't hold that position. They'll be overrun." "Eagle Eye, you are ordered to maintain overwatch and provide cover fire only. No deviation from orders." Through her scope, Sarah watched as her teammates fought desperately against overwhelming odds. She picked off enemy after enemy, but more kept coming. Her ammunition was running low, and she could see her team was in serious trouble. "Command, requesting immediate air support for my team," she called out. The response came back flat and emotionless. "Negative, Eagle Eye. Air support is unavailable. Continue mission as ordered." Sarah knew something was terribly wrong. They always had air support on standby for missions like this. She had seen the helicopters at base before they left. Someone was lying. Captain Rogers' voice came through again, weaker this time. "Eagle Eye, we can't hold much longer. Wilson's hit bad. We need extraction now." Sarah made a decision that would haunt her forever. She abandoned her position and began moving toward her team. Orders be damned, she wasn't leaving her family behind. "Eagle Eye, return to your position immediately," Colonel Hayes barked through the radio. "Negative, Command. Moving to assist my team," Sarah replied, running across the open ground with her rifle. "Eagle Eye, if you abandon your post, you will be considered insubordinate and face court-martial." Sarah ignored the threats and continued toward the compound. She had to reach her team. Through the chaos, she could hear gunfire and explosions getting more intense. But as she ran, a massive explosion rocked the compound. When the smoke cleared, Sarah saw the building where her teammates had been taking cover was nothing but rubble. Her heart stopped. "Strike team, come in. Rogers, do you copy?" she screamed into her radio. "Silence. Wilson, anyone, please respond." "Nothing but static." Sarah reached the edge of the compound just as enemy vehicles began fleeing the scene. She searched frantically through the debris, calling out for her teammates. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, she heard a weak cough. Captain Rogers was trapped under a beam, badly injured but alive. "Sarah, get out of here. It's not safe." "I'm getting you out, Captain," she said, trying to lift the heavy beam. "No, listen to me. This wasn't random. Someone wanted us dead." Rogers coughed up blood as he spoke. "What are you talking about?" Sarah struggled with the beam, but it was too heavy. "The mission, it was a setup. Hayes, he knew." Rogers' eyes were losing focus. "Captain, stay with me. What about Hayes?" But Rogers had lost consciousness. Sarah heard vehicles approaching and realized she had to make a choice: stay and likely die, or leave Rogers and try to get help. The approaching engines got louder. Sarah made the hardest decision of her military career. She squeezed Rogers' hand and whispered, "I'll come back for you, I promise." She grabbed her rifle and disappeared into the desert just as enemy vehicles surrounded the compound. From a distant ridge, she watched through her scope as enemy fighters pulled Rogers from the rubble. He was still alive, but barely. Sarah's radio crackled one final time. "Eagle Eye, report your status." For a moment, she considered responding. Then she realized the truth: her own command had set them up. They had sent her team into a trap and refused to provide support. They wanted them dead. She turned off her radio and began the long walk through the desert. She had no water, limited ammunition, and enemies all around her. But she was alive, and she was angry. 3 days later, Sarah stumbled into a small village near the Pakistani border. The locals, though suspicious at first, helped her contact the American embassy. When officials arrived to pick her up, she noticed they weren't regular embassy personnel. "Sergeant Martinez, you've been through quite an ordeal," said a man in a black suit who introduced himself as Agent Phillips from the CIA. "Where's my team? Did anyone else make it out?" Sarah asked, though she feared she already knew the answer. Phillips looked uncomfortable. "I'm afraid Strike Team Delta suffered total casualties. You're the sole survivor." "That's not true. Captain Rogers was alive when I left him. Did you send a rescue team?" "Sergeant, according to our intelligence, the compound was completely destroyed. There were no survivors to rescue." Sarah stared at him, realizing they were lying to her face. She had seen Rogers alive with her own eyes. Either they had left him to die, or something even worse was happening. "I want to speak with Colonel Hayes," she demanded. "Colonel Hayes has been reassigned. You'll be debriefed by a new commanding officer when you return to base." The flight back to the United States was the longest of Sarah's life. She replayed the mission over and over in her mind, trying to understand what had gone wrong. Every instinct told her that her team had been deliberately sacrificed, but she couldn't understand why. When they arrived at the base, Sarah was immediately taken to a secure debriefing room. Waiting for her was a stern-faced woman in an army uniform with colonel's insignia. "Sergeant Martinez, I'm Colonel. I've been assigned to investigate what happened to Strike Team Delta." "Ma'am, I need to report that Captain Rogers was alive when I left the compound. If you send a team now, he might still be recoverable." Colonel consulted her files. "Sergeant, satellite imagery shows the compound was completely destroyed. There's no possibility of survivors." "With respect, ma'am, I was there. I saw Captain Rogers alive with my own eyes." "Sergeant, you were under extreme stress. It's possible you were mistaken about what you saw." Sarah felt her anger building. They were treating her like she was crazy or incompetent. "Ma'am, I'm a trained sniper. I know what I saw." "According to your radio transcripts, you abandoned your assigned position against direct orders. This resulted in the loss of Overwatch for your team." Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Ma'am, my team was being overrun. I moved to assist them as any soldier would do." "Your orders were clear, Sergeant. Maintain Overwatch position. Your abandonment of that position may have contributed to the loss of your team." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. They were blaming her for the death of her teammates, the same teammates she had tried to save. "That's not what happened, ma'am. Command refused to provide air support. They left my team to die." "Sergeant Martinez, air support was unavailable due to enemy anti-aircraft systems in the area. Command made the tactical decision based on available intelligence." Sarah realized she was fighting a losing battle. Someone had rewritten the story of what happened, and she was being made the scapegoat. Her own military was throwing her under the bus to cover up their betrayal of Strike Team Delta. "What happens now, ma'am?" she asked quietly. "You'll undergo a full psychological evaluation and disciplinary review. Depending on the results, You may face court-martial for disobeying direct orders." Sarah sat in stunned silence as the weight of betrayal settled on her shoulders. Not only had her command sacrificed her team, but now they were destroying her career and reputation to cover it up. Over the next few weeks, Sarah underwent a series of psychological evaluations, disciplinary hearings, and investigations. Each one painted her as an unstable soldier who had cracked under pressure and abandoned her post. Her service record, once spotless, was systematically destroyed. The final blow came when she was called into Colonel's office for the last time. "Sergeant Martinez, after careful review of all evidence and testimony, it has been determined that your actions during the mission constitute gross negligence and insubordination. You are hereby dishonorably discharged from the United States Army." Sarah felt numb as the words washed over her. Everything she had worked for, everything she had sacrificed for her country, was being taken away because she had tried to save her teammates. "Ma'am, what about the investigation into what really happened to my team?" "The investigation is closed, Sergeant, or should I say, former Sergeant. Strike Team Delta died in the line of duty during a classified operation. That's all that needs to be said." As Sarah walked out of the base for the final time, she carried with her the devastating knowledge that her own government had betrayed and abandoned her team, and then destroyed her life to cover it up. She had no family to turn to, no resources, and no way to fight back against the massive military machine that had crushed her. But as she walked away, Sarah Martinez made herself a promise. Someday, somehow, she would find out the truth about what happened to Strike Team Delta, and when she did, there would be hell to pay for everyone who had betrayed them. The only question was how a dishonorably discharged soldier with nothing left to lose could possibly take on the entire military establishment. Sarah didn't have an answer to that question yet, but she knew she would find one. Because Captain Rogers and the rest of her team deserved justice, and Sarah Martinez was the only person left alive who remembered the truth about what really happened in that desert compound. She walked into an uncertain future, carrying the weight of betrayal and the burning need for revenge. The military had made a terrible mistake when they decided to destroy Sarah Martinez. They had created their own worst enemy. 2 years had passed since Sarah Martinez walked away from the military base in disgrace. 2 years of struggling to find work with a dishonorable discharge on her record. 2 years of nightmares about her fallen teammates and the betrayal that destroyed her life. She now worked as a security guard at a warehouse in San, barely making enough money to rent a small apartment in a rough neighborhood. The job was mind-numbing, but it gave her time to think and plan. Every spare moment was spent researching what had really happened to Strike Team Delta. Sarah had taught herself computer skills and spent countless hours digging through military records, news reports, and anything else she could find. She had discovered that Colonel Hayes had indeed been reassigned right after the mission to a cushy Pentagon position with a promotion. Colonel had also received a promotion shortly after Sarah's discharge. But the breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Sarah was working the night shift when a man approached her security desk. He was tall, muscular, and moved with the confident bearing of a soldier. Something about him seemed familiar. "Excuse me, are you Sarah Martinez?" the man asked. Sarah tensed, her hand instinctively moving toward the pepper spray on her belt. "Who's asking?" "My name is, I'm a Navy SEAL. I think we need to talk." Sarah studied the man carefully. He had short-cropped black hair, Asian features, and scars on his hands that suggested he had seen combat. More importantly, his eyes held the same haunted look she saw in her own mirror every morning. "I don't talk to military personnel," Sarah said coldly. "I'm not here in any official capacity. I'm here because I knew Captain Rogers." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "How did you know Rogers?" "Can we go somewhere private? This isn't a conversation for a parking lot." Against her better judgment, Sarah agreed. There was something about that made her want to trust him. Maybe it was the way he mentioned Rogers, or maybe it was the genuine concern in his eyes. They met the next evening at a small diner across town. Sarah arrived early and chose a booth in the back corner where she could watch the entrance. When arrived, he was alone, dressed in civilian clothes. "Start talking," Sarah said without preamble. "How did you know Captain Rogers?" Ordered coffee before answering. "Rogers and I went through Ranger training together about 8 years ago. We stayed in touch even after I transferred to the SEALs. He was a good man. Sarah's voice was sharp. Sarah, I know what the official reports say, but I also know Rogers didn't die in that compound 2 years ago. Sarah felt the world shift around her. What are you talking about? Reached into his jacket and pulled out a small photograph. It showed Captain Rogers, very much alive, but badly and missing his left arm. He was sitting in what appeared to be a prison cell. Where did you get this? Sarah whispered, staring at the photo. That's a complicated story, but the short version is that Rogers is being held prisoner by a private military contractor called Security. They've been using him and other captured soldiers for illegal operations. Sarah's hands shook as she held the photograph. He's alive after all this time. As of 6 months ago when this photo was taken, yes. But Sarah, there's more you need to know about what really happened to your team. Over the next hour, revealed a conspiracy that went far deeper than Sarah had imagined. Security was a private military company that had contracts with various government agencies. They specialized in operations that the regular military couldn't or wouldn't handle. Strike Team Delta wasn't sent to capture a terrorist leader, explained. You were sent to eliminate an operative who was trying to expose their illegal activities. The man you thought was a terrorist was actually. That's impossible. We had full intelligence briefings. All fabricated. Colonel Hayes was working with. Your team was supposed to die in that compound to cover up what they knew. Sarah felt sick, but how do you know all this? Was quiet for a long moment. Because my SEAL team was sent on a similar mission 6 months ago. Same setup, same lies. The difference is that we figured out what was happening before we got to the target. What did you do? We went dark. Officially, SEAL Team 6 is missing in action, presumed dead. Unofficially, we're hunting and everyone who works with them. Sarah leaned back in the booth, trying to process everything had told her. Why are you telling me this? Why come to me? Because Rogers talked about you before he was captured. He said you were the best sniper he'd ever worked with and the only person he trusted completely. We need someone with your skills. For what? Leaned forward. To take down and rescue our people. Rogers isn't the only one they're holding. We've identified at least 12 other soldiers from various failed missions who are being held prisoner. And you think 6 SEALs and 1 disgraced ex-soldier can take on an entire private military company? Not alone. We've been building a network of people who want to expose the truth. Other soldiers who survived similar setups, intelligence analysts who were silenced, even some politicians who are asking the right questions. Sarah stared at the photograph of Rogers again. Her captain was alive, but being held prisoner by the same people who had betrayed her team. The rage she had been carrying for 2 years crystallized into something much more focused. What do you need me to do? She asked. Smiled for the first time since they had met. First, we need to get you back in fighting shape. 2 years of security guard work doesn't exactly maintain peak physical condition. I've been staying in shape, Sarah protested. I'm sure you have, but we're talking about infiltrating a heavily defended compound and fighting trained mercenaries. We need you at 100%. Over the next few weeks, introduced Sarah to the rest of his team. There was Jake, a demolitions expert with a permanent grin and a talent for making explosives out of household items. David Wilson, a communications specialist who could hack into almost any system. Roberto Santos, a medic who had saved more lives than he could count. And Michael Davis, another sniper whose skills rivaled Sarah's own. The team had been living off the grid, moving from safe house to safe house while gathering intelligence on security. They had identified the location where prisoners were being held, a compound in the mountains of Afghanistan that officially didn't exist. Has been using captured soldiers for suicide missions, explained during one of their planning sessions. Missions that are too dangerous or too illegal for their regular operatives. The soldiers are told their families will be killed if they don't cooperate. Sarah felt her anger growing with each new detail. How long has this been going on? At least 5 years that we know of, maybe longer. And no one in the government knows. David looked up from his laptop. Oh, they know. They just don't care. Does their dirty work with no official oversight. As long as the operations get results, no one asks questions about methods. The team spent months planning their assault on the compound. They studied satellite imagery, intercepted communications, and even managed to turn one of his own operatives who was disgusted by what he had seen. The turned operative, a former Marine named, provided them with detailed layouts of the prison compound and guard rotations. He also confirmed that Rogers and at least 8 other American soldiers were being held there. The facility is designed to be invisible to satellite surveillance, explained. It's built into the side of a mountain with natural camouflage. The only way in or out is through a single access road that's heavily guarded. What about air support? Jake asked. Has surface-to-air missiles and radar systems. Any aircraft approaching the area will be detected and destroyed. Sarah studied the compound layouts for hours, memorizing every detail. We'll need to go in on foot, use the terrain for cover and approach from multiple directions. The compound has about 40 guards at any given time, continued. They rotate shifts every 12 hours, with the weakest security between 200 and 400 hours. Nodded, that's our window. We go in hard and fast, extract our people, and get out before they can call for reinforcements. What about extraction? Roberto asked. We can't exactly call for a helicopter pickup. We'll have to fight our way out and make it to the extraction point on foot. It's about 10 miles through mountain terrain to where we can meet our transport. Sarah realized this was essentially a suicide mission. Even if they managed to get into the compound and rescue the prisoners, fighting their way out against overwhelming odds would be nearly impossible. You all understand this is a one-way trip, she said quietly. Met her eyes. Rogers would do the same for any of us. These men deserve to come home. Over the next month, the team acquired weapons, equipment, and transportation for their mission. They couldn't use official channels, so everything had to be obtained through black market sources or stolen from military supplies. Sarah found herself remembering her training, her muscles regaining the memory of combat operations. The other team members were impressed by how quickly she adapted to their tactics and procedures. You're better than most of the SEALs I've worked with, Michael commented after a training session. I had good teachers in Delta Team, Sarah replied, thinking of Rogers and the others. The night before they were scheduled to leave for Afghanistan, pulled Sarah aside for a private conversation. I need you to understand something, he said. If this goes bad, if we don't make it out, at least we'll have tried, but if by some miracle we succeed, this is just the beginning. What do you mean? Is just one company. There are others doing similar operations. The corruption goes all the way to the top of the military and intelligence communities. Taking down one facility won't end this. Sarah nodded. One step at a time, first we get our people back, then we worry about the bigger picture. Smiled grimly. Rogers was right about you, you've got the heart of a warrior. As Sarah lay in her bunk that night, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this point. 2 years ago, she had been a broken woman with nothing left to lose. Now she was part of a team again, fighting for something that mattered. Tomorrow, she would face her greatest challenge yet. Not just the physical danger of the mission, but the emotional weight of seeing Rogers again after believing he was dead for so long. But for the first time in 2 years, Sarah Martinez felt like herself again. She was a soldier, and soldiers didn't abandon their own. It had taken her this long to find a way to keep her promise to Rogers, but she was finally going to bring him home. The team loaded their gear and began the long journey to Afghanistan. Sarah checked her rifle one final time, the familiar weight bringing her comfort. Soon, she would have the chance to show everyone who had betrayed Strike Team Delta that they had made a serious mistake. They thought they had destroyed Sarah Martinez. Instead, they had created their most dangerous enemy. And now she was coming back with some of the deadliest soldiers on the planet at her side. Security was about to learn what happened when you crossed the wrong people. The helicopter touched down in a remote valley 50 miles from the compound at exactly midnight. Sarah Martinez and the 5 Navy SEALs quickly unloaded their gear and watched as their transport disappeared into the darkness, leaving them alone in the hostile mountains of Afghanistan. Radio silence from here on, whispered as they began their approach march. Intelligence says monitors all communications in a 50-mile radius. Sarah adjusted her rifle and fell into formation with the team. After months of training together, they moved like a single organism through the treacherous terrain. Every step brought her closer to Captain Rogers and the answers she had been seeking for 2 long years. The march took 8 hours through rocky mountain passes and steep valleys. By dawn, they had reached the observation point overlooking the compound. Sarah set up her rifle on a ridge that provided a clear view of the entire facility. Through her scope, she could see that intelligence had been accurate. The compound was built into the side of a mountain, almost invisible from above. Guard towers were positioned at strategic points, and patrols moved in predictable patterns along the perimeter. "Target building is the concrete structure on the east side," whispered as he studied the compound through binoculars. "That's where said they keep the prisoners." Sarah adjusted her scope and focused on the prison building. It had small barred windows and only one visible entrance. 2 guards stood at the door, but she could see more moving around inside through the windows. "I count 16 guards on the perimeter, plus at least 6 more in the prison building," she reported quietly. "Match my count," Michael confirmed from his position on the opposite ridge. They spent the entire day observing the compound, noting guard rotations, patrol patterns, and any weaknesses in the security. Sarah felt her anticipation building as the hours passed. Somewhere in that building, Rogers was waiting for rescue. As evening approached, gathered the team for final preparations. "Remember the plan?" he said quietly. "Sarah provides overwatch and picks off perimeter guards. Jake and Roberto take out the guard towers. David handles communications jamming. Michael and I assault the prison building and extract our people." "What's our exit strategy if things go wrong?" Sarah asked. "There is no exit strategy if things go wrong. We complete the mission or we die trying." Sarah nodded grimly. These were the kind of odds she had learned to accept as a soldier. Sometimes you had to risk everything for the people who mattered most. At 200 hours, they began their assault. Sarah's first shot took out the guard at the main gate, a clean headshot that dropped him silently. Her second shot eliminated the roving patrol before he could radio for help. Through her scope, she watched as Jake and Roberto moved like ghosts toward the guard towers. The explosions came simultaneously, destroying both towers in brilliant flashes of light and sound. Alarms immediately began wailing throughout the compound as Sarah continued picking off guards who emerged from various buildings. And Michael breached the prison building just as reinforcements began pouring out of the main barracks. Sarah shifted her fire to cover their approach, dropping enemy after enemy with precise shots. "Eagle Eye, this is Hammer. We're inside the prison building," reported through their secure radio. Sarah continued providing cover fire as more operatives emerged from concealment. These weren't regular guards. They moved with military precision and carried professional weapons. Had been right about the quality of their security. "Eagle Eye, we found them. Rogers and 8 others, all alive but in bad shape. Beginning extraction now." Sarah felt a surge of relief and determination. Rogers was alive, and they were going to bring him home. She picked off 2 more guards who were trying to flank the prison building. But then everything started going wrong. "Hammer, this is Eagle Eye. I've got vehicles approaching from the south. Looks like reinforcements." Through her scope, Sarah could see a convoy of armed trucks racing toward the compound. Someone had called for backup, despite David's communications jamming. "How many?" asked as gunfire erupted inside the prison building. 6 vehicles, probably 30 to 40 hostiles, Sarah reported, already shifting her aim toward the approaching convoy. Her shots struck the lead vehicle's windshield, causing it to swerve off the road and crash into a boulder. But the other vehicles spread out and began disgorging armed men who immediately took cover and returned fire. "Hammer, you need to move fast. You're about to be overrun," Sarah called out as she continued engaging targets. "Negative, Eagle Eye. Rogers can't walk. Some of the others are in bad shape too. We need more time." Sarah realized they were trapped. The original plan had called for a quick extraction, but the condition of the prisoners meant they couldn't move as fast as needed. The reinforcements would surround the prison building within minutes. She made a decision that would have terrified her 2 years ago, but now felt completely natural. "Hammer, this is Eagle Eye. I'm moving to your position." "Negative, maintain overwatch." But Sarah was already moving, leaving her sniper position and racing down the hillside toward the compound. She had abandoned her post once before to try to save her team. This time, she wouldn't fail. She reached the compound perimeter just as the reinforcements began their assault on the prison building. Using her rifle like an assault weapon, Sarah fought her way through the enemy positions, moving from cover to cover as bullets flew around her. The muscle memory of combat operations took over completely. Duck behind cover, identify targets, engage, move to next position. She had done this hundreds of times in training and dozens of times in real operations. The only difference now was that she was fighting for the people who mattered most to her. Sarah reached the prison building just as Michael emerged, carrying Rogers between them. The captain was conscious but clearly in pain, his left arm missing and his face bearing the scars of 2 years of captivity. "Sarah," Rogers whispered in disbelief when he saw her. "You came back." "I told you I would, Captain," she replied, taking position to cover their withdrawal. Behind them, Jake and Roberto were helping 8 other prisoners who were in various states of injury and malnutrition. Some could walk on their own, others needed assistance. All of them looked like they had been through hell. "This is the extraction point," said, indicating a small valley about 2 miles from the compound. "Our transport will meet us there in 30 minutes. The group began moving toward the extraction point, but progress was slow due to the condition of the rescued prisoners. Forces were pursuing them, and Sarah could hear vehicles and helicopters in the distance. "They're tracking us," David reported. "Multiple helicopters inbound from the east." Sarah realized they weren't going to make it to the extraction point in time. The helicopters would spot them long before they reached safety. She looked at Rogers, who was struggling to stay conscious as Michael carried him. "Leave me behind," Rogers said weakly. "Get the others out." "Not happening, Captain," Sarah replied firmly. "We all go home or none of us do." That's when Sarah noticed a deep ravine running parallel to their route. It was narrow and rocky, but it would provide cover from aerial surveillance. The only problem was that it would add at least an hour to their journey to the extraction point. "This way," she called out, leading the group toward the ravine. They had just reached cover when the first helicopter appeared overhead, searchlights sweeping the area where they had been moments before. Sarah helped lower the injured prisoners into the ravine as the aircraft circled above. The next hour was the longest of Sarah's life. They moved slowly through the narrow ravine, helping injured men navigate the rocky terrain while helicopters searched overhead and ground forces swept the area around them. Rogers drifted in and out of consciousness, but during his lucid moments, he told Sarah what had happened after she left him in the compound 2 years ago. "Took me prisoner," he whispered as they rested behind a large boulder. "They told me you were dead, said you had been killed trying to rescue me." "I should have stayed with you," Sarah said quietly. "No, you did the right thing. If you had stayed, you would have been captured too. Then none of us would be getting out of here." One of the other prisoners, a man Sarah didn't recognize, spoke up. "Rogers talked about you constantly. He said someday you would come back for us. We all thought he was crazy." Sarah looked around at the group of rescued soldiers. They were all American military personnel who had been reported killed in action. Their families thought they were dead, just like Strike Team Delta. "How long have some of you been prisoners?" she asked. "I've been here 3 years," replied a man with sergeant stripes on his torn uniform. "Has been running this operation for a long time." As they neared the extraction point, they could hear helicopter engines growing closer. David was monitoring communications on a captured radio. "They've figured out we're in the ravine," he reported. "Ground teams are moving to cut off our escape route." Sarah realized they had one chance to reach the extraction point before being surrounded, but it would require her to do something that went against every instinct she had developed as a sniper. "I need to draw them away from the group," she announced. Shook his head. "Too dangerous, we stick together." "Look around, half these men can barely walk. We're not going to outrun them with the group moving this slowly." Sarah was already checking her rifle and preparing to leave the ravine. "Give me 10 minutes, then move for the extraction point as fast as you can." Before anyone could stop her, Sarah climbed out of the ravine and began running across open ground toward the pursuing forces. Almost immediately, helicopters began converging on her position. She took cover behind a cluster of rocks and began engaging the helicopters with her rifle. Her shots weren't likely to bring down the aircraft, but they would definitely get the pilot's attention. The helicopters responded by focusing all their firepower on her position. Rockets and machine gun fire turned the rocks around her into flying debris, but Sarah kept moving and shooting back. Through her scope, she could see, and the others making better progress toward the extraction point now that the helicopters were focused on her. Rogers was being carried by Jake and Roberto, while the other rescued prisoners moved as fast as their injured bodies would allow. Sarah continued her running firefight with the forces for 8 more minutes, before she heard the sound she had been hopping for the engines of their extraction helicopter approaching from the west. But now she had a new problem. She was pinned down by enemy fire and at least 2 miles from the extraction point. Even if she could break free from her current position, she would never reach the helicopter in time. She was about to accept that she had traded her life for the lives of the rescued prisoners when she heard's voice on her radio. "Eagle Eye, this is Hammer. All packages secured, coming back for you." "Negative, Hammer. Get out of here while you can." "Not leaving without you, Sarah. That's an order." Through the chaos of gunfire and helicopter engines, Sarah heard a new sound, the distinctive whine of a military helicopter approaching at high speed. But this wasn't their extraction bird. This was something much larger and more heavily armed. A massive helicopter gunship appeared over the ridge and immediately began engaging the forces. Sarah watched in amazement as rockets and cannon fire destroyed 2 enemy helicopters and scattered the ground forces. "Eagle Eye, this is Guardian Angel. We're here to provide cover for your extraction." Sarah recognized the voice. It was the operative who had turned against his own company. "Guardian Angel, how did you get military air support?" "Let's just say some people in Washington have been asking questions about missing soldiers. Your mission just became officially unofficial." The gunship continued hammering positions while Sarah made her run for the extraction point. She reached the landing zone just as the team were loading the last of the rescued prisoners into their helicopter. Rogers was conscious and sitting up in the helicopter when Sarah climbed aboard. Despite his injuries and exhaustion, he managed a weak smile. "I knew you'd keep your promise," he said as the helicopter lifted off. Sarah looked back at the compound, now burning and under assault by what appeared to be a full military operation. Vehicles and helicopters with official U.S. markings were converging on the facility from multiple directions. "What's happening down there?" she asked over the radio. "Justice," he replied simply. "Security just became the subject of a federal investigation. Turns out when you kidnap and torture American soldiers, eventually someone important notices." The flight back to friendly territory took 4 hours. During that time, Sarah learned the full scope of what his team had discovered about and similar operations. The rescued prisoners were just the beginning, had provided evidence of dozens of illegal operations, including the deliberate sacrifice of military units like Strike Team Delta. The corruption reached into the highest levels of the Pentagon and intelligence agencies. "Colonel Hayes, Colonel, and at least 6 other officers are already under arrest," informed her. "This is going to be the biggest military scandal in decades." As they approached the U.S. base in Germany where the rescued prisoners would receive medical treatment, Sarah felt a strange mix of satisfaction and emptiness. She had kept her promise to Rogers and exposed the truth about Strike Team Delta. But she also knew that this was just the beginning of a much larger fight. Rogers was rushed to medical care as soon as they landed, but not before he grabbed Sarah's hand one final time. "Thank you for not giving up on us," he whispered. "Thank you for believing I would come back," she replied. Over the next few weeks, Sarah found herself at the center of a massive investigation into military corruption and private contractor abuses. Her testimony, combined with the evidence gathered by his team, led to dozens of arrests and the complete restructuring of how the military worked with private companies. The media called her a hero, but Sarah didn't feel like one. She felt like a soldier who had finally completed her mission. Her dishonorable discharge was overturned, and she was offered reinstatement with full honors. But Sarah declined. She had seen too much corruption in the official military structure to trust it completely again. Instead, she accepted his offer to join a new kind of unit, an unofficial team that investigated and exposed military corruption wherever they found it. They would operate in the gray areas where official channels were compromised or ineffective. "There are more facilities like out there," explained during one of their planning meetings. More soldiers being held prisoner, more units being sacrificed for political gain. We can't let that continue. Sarah looked around the table at her new teammates, Jake, Roberto, David, and Michael. They were all soldiers who had been betrayed by the system they had sworn to serve, but who refused to give up fighting for what was right. Rogers was recovering well from his injuries and had been offered a medical retirement with full benefits. But he had also asked to join their unofficial team once his rehabilitation was complete. "You saved my life," he told Sarah during one of her visits to the military hospital. "Now I want to help save others." 6 months after the raid on the compound, Sarah Martinez found herself in a position she never could have imagined. She commanded a team of elite soldiers who operated outside official channels, but with the quiet support of reform-minded officials in Washington. They had already shut down 2 more illegal detention facilities and exposed a network of corrupt officers who were selling military equipment to foreign governments. Each mission brought its own dangers, but also the satisfaction of justice finally being served. Sarah often thought about the journey that had brought her to this point. From a decorated sniper to a disgraced outcast to the leader of a team fighting corruption at the highest levels of government. It had been a long and painful road, but it had led her to exactly where she needed to be. The military had tried to destroy her when she refused to abandon her teammates. Instead, they had created something much more dangerous, a soldier with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. Standing on the balcony of their safe house overlooking the Pacific Ocean, Sarah watched the sunset and thought about Captain Rogers and the rest of Strike Team Delta. They had been betrayed and abandoned by the people they trusted most. But in the end, that betrayal had led to something bigger than any of them could have imagined. The fight against corruption and injustice was far from over. But for the first time in years, Sarah Martinez felt like she was exactly where she belonged, leading a team of warriors who refused to leave anyone behind. The people who had abandoned her team had thought they were ending a threat. Instead, they had created their worst nightmare, a group of elite soldiers who knew the truth and had the skills to expose it. And they were just getting started.